Here in the United States, it's November. Thanksgiving is coming up in 2 weeks, and we are all focused on turkeys and pumpkins and sweet potato casserole. But we are also looking at the legacy of the Pilgrims and the Mayflower and their journey over from England that helped form the foundation of our country and built into the celebration of Thanksgiving that is uniquely American. Now, what does that have to do with Shakespeare? Well, we asked the question, did Shakespeare come to the Americas? The bodily form of William Shakespeare never literally traveled from England to the United States that I know of, and at least of the opinion of current Shakespeare historians, he never actually physically left England to come over to the United States. However, his plays traveled over with the Pilgrim Fathers on the Mayflower. There are documents proving that some of the few valuables that they thought were worth packing up and bringing over on their journey to Holland and then to North America was the Bible and a copy of William Shakespeare's plays. So why were the early Pilgrim Fathers bringing Shakespeare over with them to the Americas? Well, first let's talk about what was going on. England was way into exploration, and right at the height of the Spanish conquistadors coming over and exploring the southwest part of North America, Queen Elizabeth was wanting to kind of get in on that game. She wanted to explore and she wanted to establish England's power abroad, and many of her advisors, like Sir Walter Raleigh, were highly supportive of establishing colonies in the New World, which is why colonial America is considered the colonists, because England was sending people over to colonize this part of the world for England. Now, if you think of Christopher Columbus, he was doing his explorations in the late 15th century, but by the time William Shakespeare was born in 1564, Queen Elizabeth was trying to outdo the Spanish with exploration, and Sir Walter Raleigh, one of her close servants and part of her court, was heavily investing in expeditions across the Atlantic to establish the colony of Virginia in what would become the United States. Specifically, it was a colony near Roanoke Island, which is now North Carolina, and he named it Virginia after Queen Elizabeth. And this was taking place in 1584 to 1589, right when William Shakespeare was writing Venus and Adonis, as well as Two Gentlemen of Verona and the Comedy of Errors, were all happening right in this late 1580s to early 1590s timeframe. So right as Sir Walter Raleigh was sending ships from England over to the North America continent, Shakespeare was enjoying enormous popularity in England. And so basically, the ships of people like the Pilgrims were little Shakespeare fangirls traveling over to a new world. And so when they thought about, what am I going to take with me on this very long journey to have to read and enjoy, they took the Bible, which mattered to them spiritually, and they took William Shakespeare. According to the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C., it is actually documented that the Pilgrim Fathers brought over the fourth folio copy of Shakespeare's plays in the late 1600s, and they would bring it to the same Virginia settlement that Sir Walter Raleigh helped establish. Interestingly, the group of dissenters known as the Pilgrims actually were William Shakespeare's physical neighbors in England. Shakespeare lived in Southwark, England. This is where the Globe Theatre was built, and the Clink prison where the Pilgrims were housed were jailed before they were released to travel to Holland and then the Americas was in the same area as the Globe Theatre and right where William Shakespeare was living. So the Pilgrims were literally in the heart of Shakespeare country, and it makes complete sense that one of the documents or books that they would take with them when they traveled was Shakespeare's plays. Now, Shakespeare himself would die 4 years before the Pilgrims left. The Pilgrims left in 1620, and William Shakespeare died in 1616. So he was not actually alive when they left England to go to the Americas, but 4 years is not that long of a time. So his reputation and his popularity were very fresh on the minds of these people, and obviously, since we can prove they took copies of his plays to the Americas, he was a huge part of their lives and culture. And you see Shakespeare come up in the history of the United States. John and Abigail Adams frequently quoted Shakespeare in their letters. Thomas Jefferson recommended reading Shakespeare. And the Folger has a letter dated 1776 from General Charles Lee quoting from Richard III to complain, I may be in the North when, as Richard III says, I should serve my sovereign in the West. So look at that. leaders in colonial America quoted Shakespeare just like we do. I'm feeling so patriotic right now. The Folger Library in Washington, D.C. also houses the earliest known record to someone owning a copy of William Shakespeare's plays in colonial America. It's dated 1686 and it belonged to Major Edward Dale. Major Edward Dale was a royalist, which means he was loyal to England. He did not want to establish the United States of America, but he came to Virginia in the 1650s after Charles I was executed. And the royalists were defeated by parliamentarians who took over under Oliver Cromwell. And so he's leaving England and coming here, and he brought with him his copy of Shakespeare's plays. There are also a couple of 18th century wills from Virginia colonists that mention copies of Shakespeare, and Arthur Spicer in 1700 lists Shakespeare's plays in his will, and then Edmund Berkeley in 1718 have documents which came after Major Dale's copy. So they are among the earliest versions of Shakespeare's plays appearing in the United States that we have on record. So while William Shakespeare himself may never have traveled to the United States, in fact, there's not much record to indicate William Shakespeare traveled at all outside of going from Stratford to London and back again. So he himself didn't travel that much, and there's no reason to think he came to the North American continent, but his plays definitely did, which meant his legacy and the powerful, prominent position that he held for the Pilgrims and for the original colonists traveled over with them as they established this new country. And I think that gives Shakespeare some credit for helping infuse the foundation of what would become the United States with the legacy of England's greatest playwright, and further connects the friendship between the United States and England because we share a love of Shakespeare. That's it for this week here at Did Shakespeare. I'm Cassidy Cash, that Shakespeare girl, and I hope your week is a Shakespeare-filled week. Don't forget to listen with me every Monday on That Shakespeare Life, syndicated to iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, and iHeartRadio. We're excited. iHeartRadio is new. We just added that, but you can listen to us over there. New episodes drop every Monday. And we talk about history just like we discussed today, except the podcast is interview-based. So we ask these questions like, did Shakespeare come to America? To people who have spent their lives, in some cases 20, 30, and 40 years, doing Shakespeare research. We ask these good questions to them and share that conversation with you. So pull up a chair, fix a nice cup of coffee, and join us each Monday for a lovely conversation about William Shakespeare. Lastly, there are a few seats left on the trip we're doing in September 2019. If you would like to help us celebrate the lovely relationship between the United States and England by traveling with us to London and Stratford, we will be walking through the life of William Shakespeare. We will see Southwark, and we will see the Globe Theatre, and you will walk where the Pilgrim Fathers walked, and you get to see all of the many reasons they had to fall in love with William Shakespeare. You can find out more about that and see more on the history of Shakespeare in America, all in the show notes for today's episode, which is linked below, but it is at CassidyCash.com/Shakespeare in America. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.